Welcome to another ISACA Square Table, the webinars organized and hosted by ISACA Netherlands chapter in collaboration with Noria, the IT Auditors Institute of the Netherlands. Today's Square Table is about preparing the human firewall against the threat landscape. It's going to be in a bit different setting than our normal Square Tables. My name is Ramzi Masri. I'm going to be your host today, along with my co-hosts Daniela Almeida and Khivo Boryard. Both the three, me and both Daniela and Khivo will be helping you during the presentation. If possible, please stay on mute and do not turn on your cameras during the whole event. Only the moderators, me, Khivo and Daniela, as well as the guests, will be allowed to use their cameras. This is also just a quick thing to go onto our house rules. Please mute your microphone and stop sharing the video camera as soon as you enter the session and during the full session. Make sure that the account that you logged in with on Microsoft Teams is the same one that you registered with. Then you have this first name and last name. I would like to hint something that some people will have in the chat, the word unverified or external. This is all related to Microsoft Teams. This has nothing to do with settings from ISACA and has nothing to do with any kind of verification that we do, because last week we had some comments about that one. Due to technical difficulties, we only provide CPEs if you stay with us for 50 minutes. That is according to the ISACA guidelines. The guidelines contain some aspects where we can provide CPEs incremental from 15 minutes, but we do not have the technical abilities to do so, so you have to stay 50 minutes to get one CPE. This presentation will be recorded. There is no slides for this presentation. It's a fireside chat. So our presenters, our speakers will be next to each other on the screen, and that will happen shortly. If you have any questions, the questions tonight are only through the chat. Please have hashtag question in front of your question. Then me or any of the two moderators will interrupt at a good point to our speakers and ask them the question. The main reason we ask for the hashtag is basically to make sure that if you want to have a chat with the other colleagues, you're allowed to. If you want to ask the question, we know, and as moderators, we try to find the time and make it happen. Before we go into our today's crazy good fire chat, to be honest, I have some quick announcements for you as usual. So the next upcoming Square Table is 23rd of October with the title Making Penetration Testing Auditable. This is one of the nice approaches that I think you would be interested in, so please make sure that you reserve your time and attend. We do have a physical event that's in collaboration with ISACA Netherlands, ISACA Belgium chapter, Antwerp Management School, and the Cybersecurity Coalition and Biltog. So that's 14th of October. It's a physical event. It's one of our board members is going to be speaking over there in Antwerp. It's called Integrating IT Governance for a Secure Future. Very interesting event. If you would like, go to our website and register right away. As usual, my reminder for this event 2024, we started to have, actually we do have the full program available online. You can see the URL, you can see the QR code. But what is more important is the early bird rate will end 5th of October. So it's 3 days to go, and then the rate will go up. Please go ahead and register. The tickets are flying, so you need to register. This event is organized by ISACA, PVEB, Noria, and IIA. So it's a collaboration between 4 of the biggest institutions in the Netherlands. Also, a reminder that in 7 days you have the Security Congress 2024. Expect the unexpected. That's also a collaboration between Noria, ISACA, and PVEB. The URL and registration, I'm not sure if you can still register, but at least check it out in the QR code. I'll be sending it over also in the chat. I would love to introduce our speakers. So today's speakers are Steve Purser and Daria Catalu. Steve has over 30 years of experience in cybersecurity. bachelor's science in chemistry and doctorate in chemical physics, works as a software developer, project manager, CISO, and CTO, held leadership positions at NISA and major financial institutions, active stakeholder development, served on various boards, and also is currently an independent consultant. So, Steve, welcome. If you could maybe open your camera.
Thank you, Ramsey. Thank you.
Thank you. Our second speaker for tonight is Daria Katalu. Daria is a passionate advocate for cybersecurity training and awareness. She has a strong background working for key EU institutions, successfully led several impactful cybersecurity initiatives, dedicated to exploring innovative approaches like gamification for cybersecurity education, and a recognized expert in her field, sharing her knowledge through public speaking. And what is most important, not to forget that she's the head of training for Allianz Group and ENISA Advisory for Training and Awareness. Daria, welcome. I would love to
thank you very much.
Maybe give you some heat. We tried our best to have you superimposed on the fire chat, but it didn't work. So I just want to give you a bit of warmth and go ahead. Let's start that fire chat.
Okay, I'll kick off if you like. So I think Daria and I agreed that we would each give a short presentation of thoughts on this, and then we'll launch a more general discussion. But before doing that, let me, of course, thank you, Zaka, for this invitation tonight. It's really very nice to be able to, well, first of all, speak with my old colleague, Daria, because we worked together in the past. And this was very nice, and also to talk to your members, of course. But I also like the title of what you proposed tonight. So the idea of the human firewall, I might actually pinch it because I think it conjures up quite a nice image of what we are doing with the people side of cybersecurity. And because I don't use it very often myself, I sort of tried to define it for myself. And I came up with a well-informed and trained workforce capable of handling a variety of threats in several different contexts. And here I think the contexts are very important. So the obvious one is at work, but of course people work at home more and more, and people work when they're traveling. So context will make a lot of difference to what people have to do in any given situation. Now, how would you do this? I think it boils down to creating and maintaining a security culture that's aligned with the company culture. And again, this is very important, this concept of alignment. It sounds obvious, but sometimes it's missed. So to take a very extreme example, if you are a highly digital company and someone comes in and creates an awareness campaign which is based on paper, of course, it's not going to fly. But I think this question is actually more complex than you may think it is. And I would like to spend just 2 minutes talking about understanding. And this may seem a bit basic, but this is probably the most fundamental thing I will say all evening this evening. So it's interesting to me, having been in the industry for about 30 years, how little time people seem to invest in understanding problems in cybersecurity before they start with a solution. And this in itself is a big problem. Of course, it can be okay. You could say, rightly so, that problem solving is iterative. So you develop an understanding of the problem, you do something, you learn something more, you come back and you modify your understanding of the problem, and then you work again. But the question is, do you? Quite often people don't, and they stick with this initial rather incomplete idea of the problem and don't go any further. And this can be quite damaging. And I'm sure this is going to come up again in the discussion at several points. So let me illustrate it, which is something, again, I would like to bring early into the debate. As you're all aware, there's a very intense discussion going on at the moment about skill sets and how we are drastically short of them. But my perception of the debate, and I'm certainly not saying we are not short of skill sets, but it's very much based on the supply side of things. So, you know, that we are not supplying the correct skill sets fast enough. Whereas I personally believe we need to do a lot more work on the demand side. What are we asking for? For instance, if you go and look at recruitment advertisements for various posts, honestly, they're sometimes ridiculous. They ask for qualifications which are almost impossible to get or require too many years experience, whatever. They are not really well matched to what the organization needs. So I think this is coming back to the idea of understanding. you need to, in order to establish a strong community culture and to be able to have this firewall, you really need to know what you're looking at. And let me just sort of put in ad hoc here, because I think it's important. Not everybody needs to have a degree or a diploma to be useful in cybersecurity. There are a lot of people who can do a lot of very useful things without this. And I think if we don't get this opportunity, if we don't seize it, we will waste half the workforce. The US government, incidentally, has just taken this step and have moved to a more flexible recruitment policy. So the idea is the organization doesn't need hundreds of cryptographers or cloud security specialists, but they do need staff who are experienced in working within a security framework, know how to apply it, know about prioritization, trade-offs, etc., and can thrive in a correct security framework. So,
Steve, if I may interrupt you, we
please.
don't want to lose our jobs, man. We do have qualifications. We need to be.
No, I'm not suggesting that at all. Believe me, there's more than enough jobs for people with qualifications. That's absolutely not going to be an issue. The issue is, how do you fill all these jobs that are not being filled? Let me give you an example. A CISO these days has to do so many different tasks, many of which I think could be delegated to other people, so that the CISO can concentrate on the essential tasks that the CISO must do. So please don't worry about that. It's not going to happen. I don't believe it. But I'm just going to go through quickly these remaining points and then pass on to Daria. We know, of course, that creating a security culture also involves two types of training. So we refer to general awareness training and we refer to specific security training. So awareness training is for everybody, whereas the latter will be determined by the job role and will be very specific to what any particular person needs to do. I think, at least my point of view, is that general awareness training should aim to develop what I would call an intuitive risk management system. What do I mean by that? If someone approaches you in the street and asks, where do you live, what do you do, what's the name of your partner or whatever, you don't just tell them. You think, what does this guy or lady want to know for? This is not correct. So you have a natural barrier to information you will give out in this kind of context, whereas it's absolutely amazing how much information people will spill onto a screen, without even thinking about it. They will put all kinds of private details into social media without a moment's hesitation. So that's not intuitive risk management. And I think we need to move in this area to what I would call electronic common sense, to be able to judge why we're being asked for something and to respond appropriately. So a few examples of this are, websites with lots of advertise, sometimes selling dubious products, should ring an alarm bell, I think. Lots of offers for three things. Crisis situations which occur when, the banks are closed. This is a classic phishing situation, so that, you can't check it up on a sort of out-of-band channel, as it were. And sites giving risky content such as pornography, etc. So this is the way I think we need to move. So how does one do this? How does an organization go about doing this successfully? And I can only, of course, give you some hints because it varies from organization to organization. But my sort of prescription for doing things would be, as I said at the beginning, begin by understanding what you need. Every organization has its own problems, its own risks, and its own context. So you really need to develop a very thorough understanding of what you really need from your staff before you start to create this culture. Make it a continual process. One of my criticisms, and it's one of the only ones because it's a great initiative about the European Cybersecurity Month, is it's only once a year. That's not really a criticism because they do a great job, but we're not where we need to be. We need to be giving things out on a continual basis, in my opinion. Make it interesting. Use storytelling. Storytelling is a fantastic technique. Everyone can assimilate with stories, and everyone knows the consequences of leaving your door unlocked or your windows unlocked. So it's a great way to get into other people's minds. Make it dynamic, so involve the staff and, of course, listen to their ideas. So one of the rules I set myself sort of halfway through my career was I try not to give people solutions. I try to give them problems. Even if, I might have a good idea of what the solution might look like, it's much more powerful to give people problems because then they solve it. It becomes their baby. You get stronger buy-in, and you also get some very innovative ideas, which you may not have thought of yourself. So this idea of really using people to generate ideas rather than to implement what is classic knowledge is a very good one. Use different contexts, of course. This is more and more important in today's mobile world. And don't forget to give concrete recommendations. I mean, it's good to tell people what's going on out there, but if you only frighten them and don't give them any tools that they can use to deal with it, then this is not a good thing. So one example of this, of course, was if you're talking to people about phishing, and let's take this example of people who get a mail on a Friday evening. If you don't do this, your bank account is going to explode. You're going to lose all your money. You get the idea. Obviously, they should be checking this in an out-of-band channel with friends or the police or what have you, but certainly not just clicking the button to respond to it. So that's my sort of brief introduction. I would like to now pass over to Daria and hear what she has to say. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. I think we are on a very important topic on the human firewall, and where I stand, I'm always looking at the human firewall and the complementarity to the technical firewall. So let me say that I took care of human firewalls at local level back in Bucharest area for administrations and NGOs. Then I took care of the European policy for building up a human firewall, and this is where we met in my early years of career, Steve. And it was always a pleasure to work with you. Then I moved on to working for a human firewall at the global scale in Allianz right now. So what my recipe would be right now, if I would speak about a recipe, would for sure, and those who work with me know that I will say about these three pillars: communicate, educate, and then advocacy. And different activities can fit in different points. And it's quite important to have frameworks of KPIs and to know where you are close to your business or to your close policy, depending what kind of organization you are in. And never forget that your technical firewall cannot survive without a human firewall. Sometimes we like to look at dashboards and we work only with dashboards, but working with people, of course, is not easy all the time. But I think the solution is always to have a complementarity of actions between the two. And I would add maybe on my pillar of the advocacy that I just explained that projects like Cybersecurity Month, they are quite useful for CISOs and CTOs and chief information officers or operating officers, you name it. Because first of all, from where I stand, we can talk about our priorities in cyber. So that's always important for my CFO to know about my priorities. Or let's say the head of a public organization to be reminded about the priorities in cyber. So this kind of let's say advocacy, coordinated advocacy, can create that overall. If it's enough, of course, Steve, we can discuss about it. And I think for sure we need more let's say, talk in January, February, or all the rest of the year, not necessarily in October. And yeah, this is for the advocacy pillar. For the education pillar, I will always advise for the human firewalls to be based on what you see on your technical firewall, on your dashboards. So once you see something that comes towards your privileged users, well, you have to use it and you have to train exactly that vulnerability, or you have to train that threat. Something more is also to look into how you introduce cyber training in other types of training, because of course, I would like to have my own training, but what if we can work cross teams and introduce a little bit of a piece of it, cyber in a policy training? I also like that part. And I think nowadays we also speak about learning nuggets quite a lot. I mean, like under 5 minutes type of training, which is like useful and to the point. That also works. And moving on towards the communication pillar, or where you create more awareness, I would invite you maybe to check on awareness in a box. This comes also from ENISA or in your organization, and you can take templates that you can, let's say, reuse every month or every. So this is quite useful. And for communication, I would like to also maybe emphasize on this fun story that you should never waste a good incident or a good. I think. Would you agree on that, Steve?
Yeah, I would. I like very much your emphasis on communication, because I think you really hit the nail on the head there. A lot of this, in fact, I would say sort of over 90% is about good communication. And one thing I forgot to mention in my little introduction, but you sort of picked up on it, is, of course, we learn from an early age as cybersecurity people that all solutions are people, process, and technology, and you need to have a sensible balance of all three. And I personally think, after 20, 25 years of going to conferences, etc., that it's still, unfortunately, systematically the case that people overplay the importance of technology and underplay the importance of people, whereas I think it's the other way around. Technology is certainly important, but if you have a system in the corner that's ringing alarm bells all day and no one is doing anything about it, that doesn't help anybody. And unfortunately, this does happen. And then one more comment, Darian, I'll take your view on this, but it bothers me a bit when I see, of course, it had to come into the discussion, but the kind of language and ideas that are coming out around artificial intelligence, that it will solve all problems and, we can sit back and let it make the decisions. I don't believe this is true at all. I think you will need people behind artificial intelligence. It's certainly not a perfect technology. It can be attacked like every other technology, just as humans can, of course. And here I'll reference Caldieri's book, if you don't know it, The Psychology of Persuasion. It's exactly about what we're talking about tonight, and it comes back to this theme of communication. So yeah, I think you've hit it on the head. I think if you manage to set up a good framework for communication, and you talk about the right things, you're more than halfway there.
Can I interrupt with a quick question? So I think you touched on multiple very good points about the human firewall, but maybe for me, I would like to have a bit of a definition on different levels, because I see the human firewall, I know the term is used differently. I will use it in a completely different way. But I see the C level as sometimes the human firewalls blocking our investments, or enabling our investments. So it becomes a firewall for good or bad. I see the middle management the same, and I see the people doing different jobs that are not IT related, like supporting functions in most of the companies, are our major human firewalls that we need to focus on. So I would love to hear your ideas about the idea of leveling, the different level of where you are in the organization, and how that relates to a human firewall.
I've talked a lot there, so yeah.
Let me come with an example from our work experience, Steve. So let's think about the beginning of Cybersecurity Month in Europe, when the budget was like zero, So we were going with my zero team.
Never very big.
We were talking with Steve, like, can we get more budget? Can we do that? And I think there was a key point that we both agreed on creating the leverage on public-private partnerships and creating, taking a little bit of something from each of the entities, that we can create a powerful tool for all European authorities and companies to use it. Yeah. So in this case, there was maybe a human firewall, but we could find a common denominator. What do you think?
I think that's a really good point. Funnily enough, I was with the Brussels bubble people last night, and I also really stressed this idea of better and more frequent use of public-private partnerships. So I think you're really spot on there. But maybe if we come back to within the enterprise, I think you also hinted at something else. And in your first intervention, this point about communication is that it's actually much more difficult than people think to get this communication going, which is why you have this internal firewall effect. When you when you do anything these days in security, in fact, you've got several groups of people involved. You've of course got the board, who are traditionally very difficult to reach and convince. But then internally, you've got the CISO, who seems to have more and more responsibilities. You've got the legal people, you've got the compliance people, you've got the technical people. So I think what Dario said about setting up a sensible framework for discussion in which information flows as it should do, so the right information to the right people at the right time, is really half the battle and will knock down these firewalls. Interestingly enough, as we speak, I know a lot of security professionals are trying to target the board because, as you probably know, NIS2 and DORA, Article 5 of DORA, Article 20 of NIS2, are focusing very much on board level responsibility across the board, from understanding risk right to implementing it. And the board is now very much at risk, but it's still difficult to get through to the board. So I think Daria hit it on the head when, you really got to sort out this communication framework and work with the people to make sure that you've got these pathways through to these different groups in the organization. And last but not least, you've got to adapt your language and your stories, if you like, and your means of communication to suit their needs. You don't go to the board and talk about hexadecimal and bits and bytes. Of course, everybody knows this. But equivalently, you don't talk to lawyers about technical concepts unless you can explain them in legal terms. So communication is...
Yeah, and maybe I will support our line here with another example. Let's say cyber exercises. I think the boards like them a lot, and I think all CISO teams like mine, we all like it, cyber exercises. And of course, we also have Cyber Europe, the famous European exercise, and some others. And I think if you use this kind of training, you could also demolish some firewalls, some human firewalls. And if it grows and you see the importance of it and you put in more complexity in a cyber exercise, maybe also the budgets will increase overall annually, I would say.
Yeah. Another great point, actually, which has another side to it as well, which I'm glad came up in the discussion, and that is the need to test things in general. I think we don't do enough of it. So Daria gave a very good example of where we did work hard to do this at European level. And I think organizations, whether they're from private or public sector, should do this as much as possible. This doesn't mean you have to do full-fledged cyber exercises. A simple test you can do with your staff is you can just go up to somebody and ask, where is the security policy? And you'll be quite surprised in many cases that they can't find it. And then you have to do something about it. So very simple tests can have very effective results. But this idea, I think, of testing things, as Daria said, I think it shows that you have an issue that needs to be resolved. It's tangible. It's something board level people can understand. And I would very much support this point of view.
Yeah, what else? Yeah,
Can
please.
I ask a question about a follow-up, to be honest? So one of the things that as a CISO we do is awareness, right? Mostly people think about phishing campaigns just to make people do some exercise. Sometimes it's even gamified. But also, the general annual kind of compliance, security awareness, either it's a slide deck or movies or a collection of both. And it's a kind of one size fits all for the whole organization. What's your view on, and I even wrote that question in the chat, what's your view on having specialized training for boards, especially after the new regulations? Should we have a kind of a special training?
You have to. I mean, it's more or less obligatory. Again, I won't quote the regulations to you, but anyone who's listening, you might like to go and look up Article 5 of DORA and Article 20 of the NIS2 directive. Yep. It's quite tough stuff. It really is. It's putting a lot of responsibility on boards. And one of the things it says explicitly is that boards need to train themselves in cybersecurity. It's written down and they will be tested and audited upon it. So no choice here. And it really bothers me sometimes that my perspective is that this is not getting through to board level. That worries me.
That's, Steve, exactly why I'm asking that question, and both of you are experts. and my question also, maybe a follow-up so Daria can have a comment on both. What type of security training should we give the board? That is also a question that a lot of CISOs are asking, what should we go and give them? So Daria, back to you then.
Yeah, and I think we want our boards to do a lot of things and to be aware of everything. And of course, cyber, maybe it's not a new thing for some boards. So for some others, it is a new thing. And I definitely agree that we need the tailored training. Maybe I would go back to these tools that offer cyber exercises for the boards. These are always good to be hands-on and a bit on the policy. I'm always in favor of high-level, let's say, quarterly briefs from on the cybersecurity. This also works. It's not like it's more like open discussion in a way. I not exactly a training, but this is always good to have an open door and the possibility to ask questions. It's also important, I think. But yeah, what do you say, Steve, on that?
I agree. Look, I think so. I spent a lot of my career, of course, traveling around Europe and talking to boards and high-level politicians, as it were. And of course, these people have a very high level and broad and strategic view on things. So I think the trick to talking to boards is of course, you've really got to pitch it at their level. So you really need to align everything so they can see the business impact and to avoid techie stuff, which is not necessary. I think that's the first thing. But I think the essential principle here, and it's one that I've been using for many years, is to remember that a manager only has to understand cybersecurity to the extent that they can make the decisions they need to make. That's really important. So, they don't need to know the mechanics of how a ransomware attack works, but they do need to know, how frequent it is it going to affect them, and what would the impact be? It's like driving a car. You can drive a car without understanding how the engine is constructed under the hood. So I think, and it's back again to what Daria said at the beginning, this communication issue. If you structure your communication well, if you can relate things back to business perspectives, business risks, the kind of things that they deal with on a day-to-day basis, and still, get them thinking about, these new risks coming in through use of IT. I think the boards will be very receptive. I think people go too technical too soon and use a lot of jargon, which is not necessary. This is definitely not the way to go.
And I will pick up on this new things coming up that you mentioned. And yeah, I'm very busy on dealing with training on AI and deepfakes, for example. This is something that it comes also as a demand, like people want to hear about that at all levels. So it's quite important also when you see that people are reaching you as a cyber team to come up with training. So
but this is super interesting, Dan. I really have to jump in here because it's really something I've witnessed right from the start of my career, and it's people tend to jump on solutions without knowing what the problem is. I mean, years ago, I gave a presentation around, I can't remember, many years ago on the intrusion detection. And someone from the audience came up and said to me, should I have an intrusion detection system? And I said to him, you tell me, do you have the problem that requires one? And I think this is a really important thing in creating a human firewall, is to get people thinking about why you need, a piece of software or a process or whatever, and not to work the other way around and see that everybody else is doing it and therefore assume that you need it. It's really understanding and then coming up with, what you need in your organization to cope with the problem.
I kind of guided you both towards the board. Now let me guide you towards middle management and employees, if you don't mind. I would also love to know your opinion about middle management, because they are the ones that practically transform the strategy into actions. And also maybe a bit of a discussion on the skills gap, Steve, that you mentioned quickly in your introduction, because you mentioned the the PPT, the People Process Technology Triad. And I do agree with you, at least on my humble level, that people are mostly the ones involved, because technology is not being configured by itself. It's actually people. Misconfiguration is one of the main issues that we see. Also, process is designed by people and usually, if not automated, done by people. So my concept of a human firewall is a bit further. And as I said, it's a good and a bad one. Sometimes the firewalls, as you were discussing with Daria a few minutes ago about the board, if they are not okay, then they are your bad firewall, because they close the investments, they don't put the proper priorities for the business, and ending up most probably hurting the business. And on the other side, there is the good firewalls when people are aware what to pass, what not to pass, what to inspect, and then they help you do your job, which is when they do the process correctly, when they figure out process issues and risks and pointing them out, or when they manage the technology. And that's why I mentioned the skill gap. You mentioned earlier, do we need someone with technology background or not? People from other areas could join. Maybe a bit of emphasis, what can they do what should they learn? Because I personally don't believe you can get zero technical knowledge. You need some, doesn't have to be very much indeed, but you cannot be also technology literate and become a cybersecurity professional. That's at least my humble 2 cents. I would love to hear your opinion, Darius, on that one.
Gary, you want to kick us off? Or?
Sure. So, yeah, with your last the sentence, of course, like I am on the side of the wall where we need to skill up and upskill with the technology. So no matter which let's say topic you'd like to be an expert on, you need also a bit of like cyber skills overall, because this is good for your profession and good for your private life. So I would take it like that. If I am thinking about cybersecurity skills, that's again something which I would say that is, I would use this term of it's going on all the time. So lifelong learning in a way. And there is a lot of content there. It's only up to us to curate and make like a list of training and get our let's say favorable and favorite resources on it. I do think that currently we are doing let's say good progress overall with policies, and I also see companies going in public-private partnerships for skills like my own, for example. But I also see that the needs are also up in a way. Like now I need to have Gen AI, and I need to think about how do we secure in a Gen AI-enabled world. So I'm thinking about that kind of parts. And yeah, I would stop here for the moment.
So let me add a couple of points. So I think, of course, I agree with most of that. But let me use a concept to illustrate your reference to middle management and where things sometimes go wrong. So when you do risk management, you analyze the risks, and there are these three traditional ways of dealing with them, one of which is management, of course. So you manage the risk. But as we all know, when you manage a risk, you don't normally manage to manage that risk right down to zero. And there's some level of residual risk which is left over. Not many organizations deal with this, and I think it's a pity. And when they do, the residual risk, for some strange reasons, seems to get assigned to the CISO, which is entirely the wrong person to assign it to. At least in my experience, and I admit this is personal experience, but the residual risk is that risk that's left over after your controls of sort of taken effect, as it were. And to my mind, this should be signed off by the business manager, because these are the people who are, taking the risk for all their business, and cybersecurity should not be any different. And this also forces the business managers to get involved and to understand what the cybersecurity component of their risk profile is. So this is an example, I think, of where, perhaps we need to be a bit more forceful with business managers. I'm not saying they do a bad job, not at all, but I think they need sometimes to take more responsibility in the chain of cyber risk. Certainly, I don't think this should be the CISO. And then I would reiterate a point that I made earlier, and that is, again, this understanding. You really need to understand what skills are needed for a particular position. You're right in saying that everybody needs some skills. I mean, we all deal with IT, but for some people, a receptionist, for instance, or data entry clerk, if that still exists these days, these kind of things probably need, very specific skills in a very well-defined context. Plus the stuff, if you work at home, don't use your kid's computer, blah, 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 blah. And then others need very broad skills. So it's really a question, it's back to understanding what you need and concentrating on that and nothing more. And don't go running after the problems that you don't have. If you've not got AI in the enterprise yet, you don't need to secure it yet. And then make sure that, if you do, that people are prepared for this component as it comes in.
We have a couple of questions coming from the audience. Question from Daniela. Further to Steve's comment on limiting the knowledge conveyed to the audience, although you do not provide technical details, I think she was mentioning that about the discussion with the board. Don't we have the responsibility to convey indicators of compromise, common methods, etc.? I see too many awareness programs that are too high level. So what's your comment on that? We have also a follow-up question afterwards. So tell me if you would like to take both at the same time and combine the answer, or
I can. Oh, well, let's take this one because I think it's quite
yeah,
quick to deal with. Look, I mean, there are two concepts here. One of which is awareness training, and one of which is specific security training. When you get as low as things like indicators of compromise, unless people can do something very real with them, which is mainly technical people, I think, then I don't personally think it's appropriate. So I wouldn't talk about indicators of compromise to a board myself. Some exceptions in the past, because I'm quite old, I dealt with a thing called the I love you virus. Very easy to see because it had "I love you" in the title, and of course everyone wanted to open it because they wanted to know who loved them. Yes, but it's very much of an exception. So distinguish between awareness training, which is setting the global parameters, it's getting people a knowledge which they can use maybe in all assets of their life, and specific training. And then in specific training, yes, you do need to mention this stuff. I totally agree with you.
Yeah. I also agree with this. I wouldn't talk about any indicator in a high level, but I will for sure know that some people will come back to ask for it. And I already, if I did my job well, I will know who those persons are already. So that's a nice interaction in a way,
Yeah.
that they are
Yeah.
searching for the information.
Very good. Yeah.
okay. On a follow-up question, also from Daniela, what delivery formats are you currently using for the awareness trainings, and do you use phishing simulations? Because you were also talking about
Okay.
simulations.
So maybe if I take this, I'm using all delivery formats, existing and non-existing, even and creating our own. I like a lot tailoring, and currently I'm in a big organization, and we do a lot of tailoring, and we have our own frameworks. But also in the past, like for the EU institutions and agencies, like it's very important to know what's on the market, but sometimes you have to also know what kind of resources you can use inside, what kind of like people are like, what kind of format. So that's why I'm really saying that everything is good, but if you can put it in a framework, what's for communication, what's for education, and what's for advocacy. I like this kind of three pillars, like you understood me already, because it offers me ways to measure, to reply to all kind of questions. And yeah.
That's a perfect answer by Daria. Just to illustrate it, perhaps, I think you need to think any technique is good. If you can reach the people, use it. But, it's obvious that if you want to reach younger people, then things like gamification and computer works well. If you want to reach someone over 50, they go home at night probably and watch TV. At least this is statistics in Belgium. So, if I were doing this at a national level, I might have adverts on the TV for the older people and things coming through Instagram and Snapchat and what have you for the younger people. So I think this is right. Use everything you can, but think about your target audience and think about what's going to speak to them, what's going to excite them, whether they're going to interact with and find it a pleasure and learn something. That's the key, I think.
Yep, thank you. I want to touch base on something you said about AI, and you mentioned that maybe some organizations are not using it. In most of the organizations, I wouldn't say even IT-centric, to some extent, people are trying to automate parts of the job or even enhance it. Like, for example, people who don't write nice emails because they know their tone is not okay, or like myself, English is not my first language, so sometimes I'm like, that looks rough. We go to the Geminis, the ChatGPTs, or the Microsoft Copilot, which is still ChatGPT, just to enhance our English. And I personally know what I paste there and what I don't, because I'm a security guy, but a lot of people don't, and they just want to do a nice job. So do you still think AI is not really infiltrated everywhere?
Look, I'm a bit tired of hearing about AI. It comes up in almost every conversation, but I do appreciate the question. I think it's relevant. I think it's overhyped. And I think it can do a lot of good if it's used in the right way. Let me give you an example. If you're going to use AI to carry out diagnostics, and apparently it's quite good at this, I would certainly want a human person behind it to check what it comes up with. There's a very famous case in the States. This might be folklore, but I think it's true, where a lawyer actually used AI to construct his case material. And when he got to court, he found out that AI had invented half of it. This is the phenomenon of hallucinations, which we know takes place sometimes. So it's an experimental technology. We went through the same thing with intrusion detection. You've got false positives and things like this. I think we will, over time, learn how to use it correctly. But this discussion is about the human firewall, and I really believe you need a human behind it. You need to check what it's telling you. And one last reflection here, so I'm a bit older, and when calculators came out, there was a prediction that people would not be able to do mental arithmetic. And, to some extent, it's come true. There are people who will just believe what the calculator tells them without even checking it themselves. And that's rather a dangerous thing, I think. You need to have this check yourself to say, is it reasonable, is it not? That's what I think, at least.
And on my side, I personally experiment with everything that I read about, and it's like from my own personal, let's say, curiosity. And I think that we should do that in order to understand what are the potential and what can I use it. For example, now there is also, I'm involved in a work that the European Commission is doing a code of practice for the AI. How this looks like in 1 year from now, I don't know. But right now there is a discussion about it. And of course, there is the hype, as Steve mentions. And I hope that we can get let's say, above the hype, and let's see what we can do with it and use it for the good. And yeah.
Let me come in, because I can say something else here which might be useful to the audience. So I spent a lot of time over the last 5 or 6 months looking into the security side of AI. And it turns out that the number of controls that you can actually use to mitigate risk on AI itself, which are not traditional controls, are quite small. So there are things, as you expect, like protecting your data, making sure that it's not trained by malicious people, etc. But there are a number of controls, but you can count them on one hand. And I would say to people who do use AI and who want to secure it, my view on this would be that 90% is in the good old traditional controls, making sure that you have this strong infrastructure in place, doing all the stuff you normally do, making sure your application is secure, that the data it uses is secure, etc. And then you have this handful of controls which are actually very AI specific. And last but not least, again, to back up what I said previously, I think sometimes what is missing in the control sets I have seen is that it would benefit from having a cross-check by a human, because the risk is so high.
So maybe a quick question also from my side. A lot of the things that the human firewall, the good one, would stop from organization from falling for is like phishing attacks, smishing attacks, phishing attacks. It all comes to social engineering. Social engineering is not a new concept. It's a very old one. Used in crimes in the beginning, con jobs, and then now it went into IT. And as far as maybe 2001, maybe even earlier, there was like videos on how you get a free pizza by calling this is the very traditional American story. I'm referencing to a video that's on YouTube, very known series called The Broken, and I think the guy who was in it was really youthful back then. Now he's one of the cybersecurity experts, known ones, Kevin Rose. Yeah, but he is, and it's a nice YouTube video up till now. Honestly, I think it could work in a smaller pizza joints. But then the question, because we're talking about the human firewall right now, how can you basically build social engineering resilience? I think that's the main target of having those human firewalls. If you want to do that on a personal level, on a corporate level, on a government level. So if you can answer on the three ones, I would really appreciate it from both you and Daria. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I would start with the culture, I would say. I think this is the key for me, because I would like my colleagues to, let's say, come and talk to whatever they see. Even if they did something wrong, it's good to talk back to the cyber team, so we know what's going on. Because if it comes by email, okay, we may have some tools, But as you said, it comes multi-channel social engineering. So then you may not have tools available for all the, let's say, phones or SMS, or so then it goes back to culture for me. People getting used to react to something which seems wrong in a way. So,
yeah, I tend to agree. Once again, I'm going to offer a reference for you all. It's a very famous book. It's called The Psychology of Persuasion by Calderi. I think it was used by Kevin Mitnick, who, of course, this was his favorite way of breaking into enterprise. And me personally, if ever I wanted to break into an organization, I would definitely go down the route of social engineering. It's so much easier than all this techie stuff. But what can you do about it? I think you can do some storytelling and you can illustrate the principles. So let me give you one principle which is very easy to understand once you tell the story. So let's say that Daria is a system administrator and I want to get her to give me access to something I don't have. So I might say to her, Daria, I'm in real problems. I need access. Can you change my password, please, to the person who created this file so that I can access it? And Daria, as a good system administrator, is going to say, no way, I'm not going to do this, right? But now here's the interesting thing. Psychologically, what has happened is I've asked for something and Daria has refused it. So now she feels under psychological pressure, whether she knows it or not, to give some ground when I give my next question, because we are socially brought up like this. So now I say, okay, could you just open the door for a few minutes so I can look up the thing I want to do? And then, you can close it so it's really, the risk is much less, etc. Now Daria's under pressure because she sees me as being more reasonable, and people really act like this. So she is so much more likely, Daria wouldn't, of course, because she knows about this stuff, but people are so much more likely to give into this. So I think by illustrating these principles, talking people through scenarios, and teaching them, to think at the right moment. And this is a very important thing. And a lot of security awareness is about this. You don't have to rush into every single decision. Think before you click. There are very few things in life where you can't take 10 seconds to think before you click the button. And this is the kind of thing I think we need to teach people, along with, the usual stuff. If you're phoned up by people, asked to phone them back, check that the phone number, all this kind of stuff. So I think you can do it through storytelling, illustrating the principles, and playing out scenarios and showing where other people have fell down, as it were.
If I have an idea or follow-up of this, we do have to do the storytelling with the system admin. I think would be a very good sketch if we do this for awareness reasons. Yeah.
I would say, Daria, then use a real-life scenario that happened September last year. Yeah. I was going to comment to Steve that he gave an exact scenario. I don't know if you really didn't want to mention the place or not, but this is the suspected scenario of MGM Grand Hotel in Las Vegas losing money, almost $100 million. And right. I want to just stress, because this is recorded, it's suspected one that on an evening of a weekend, someone called the help desk claiming to be someone else, and through a very, very nice psychological trick of thanking them for their hard work, thanking them for working over hours, they were able to gain access. Yeah. So it's still suspicion. Nobody's 100% sure of that. Just not to avoid any litigation against me. We don't know, but this is one of the likely scenarios that happened that night. So it might be interesting. There is a full, let's say, information on the internet about this specific one. And in the same week, another casino was hacked. So it seems like it was the same way they got in. It was all phishing and social engineering.
Yeah, no, it's a classic, absolutely classic.
Yeah. But what I would also like is that never lose a good crisis to waste, So if it happens to any organization, it would also be really good to see some videos or some articles about it, so that everybody is informed about it.
Absolutely, yeah, as we are doing now, in fact, yes.
We have a question from also Daniela. EU and ENISA were quickly mentioned. What is the role in aiding public and private organizations? That's part of the question. And the second part is, should they not be more participative and provide more resources and actual frameworks to ensure a more resilient level of awareness?
Okay. Well, look, I'll start because as you probably know, I was number 2 at Tenissa for a long while. But I have to be careful what I say. I'll give you, this is my opinion, right? So please understand that it's my opinion. First of all, they don't have the resources to do this, to be quite honest. They're a small setup. They're only around 130 people. So they work in a different way, I think. But my personal opinion is that, as Daria mentioned, I think right at the beginning, there are better ways of doing this. We could be using a lot more public-private partnerships. We could be spinning off some of the work which has been going on for years, to my mind, and which is now relatively routine, and doing new stuff. And I really like this idea of, we call it multiplier organizations. So the idea is that ENISA talks to a range of companies, be they companies themselves or organizations, and these people talk to other ones, and it cascades down. I think this is a far better model at the European level. And last but not least, don't forget, because this is very important, that ENISA is not allowed to do something which would perturb the workings of the market, right? So this makes things very difficult. You can't do something which would give one market player an advantage over another. And a lot of the thought behind the way they work is based on these kind of principles.
And I would add maybe on the training and awareness part, I see that there are a lot of resources that anybody probably from the call can use if you just see what's there, like the education page of ENISA and the threat landscape report. It gives you, let's say, a lot of good material. I use it myself. But I would also like to reflect a moment on, okay, so we had a first European cybersecurity strategy a long time ago. And I don't know, Steve, I think there was a lot of improvement, no, in terms of bodies that we have at the EU level.
Absolutely.
In terms of CERT teams and coordination centers in different member states. I think there is a lot of work now going on in terms of, like, if you look at like 15 years ago when we started this and we were both trying to see what's going on in the cybersecurity European level, no?
No, indeed. Look, I think it's really a great example. It's come a long way, and I really have to congratulate all the people, because you as well. You're a big part of this, of course. But I still think, to come back to my comment, that we are not where we need to be. We need to be. I think the month is now an outdated concept. It needs to be continual, and people need to be thinking continually. So many years ago, and this was a personal failure, and maybe at the time you were still there, Daria, but I tried to move the thing along by suggesting that we do it quarterly rather than yearly. And then my idea was to move from quarterly to really continuously. Very hard to do, but it's necessary. I mean, the threat landscape moves exceedingly fast. You can't really survive on a once-a-year update on these things. It's certainly, the work is fantastic, what people have done, but we need to be in a different space at the moment, I think.
Sure.
So I am aware we're almost at the end of the hour, and I unfortunately have a lot of questions, but I'll ask one question and then ask you for final notes before we close. So we mentioned a lot about the corporate. You mentioned a lot about personal level. Also, I love the fact that you said think. This is a very good takeaway for everyone. What about the legislative part? I know that we mentioned on IS2, DORA, and you mentioned the articles, and you mentioned the board. But do you think there should be some kind of parliamentary awareness more than just just the corporate or the organization? We have seen in the Netherlands lately, the Dutch police had a cybersecurity incident. I have to say, cybersecurity incidents are everywhere, and unfortunately, the CISO is the one to be blamed, as if the rest of the organization has no role, which is unfair. So I don't know who's the CISO for our Dutch police. Hopefully he or she, I don't care about the pronoun, is not in any way blamed, because it could happen. But I want to know your opinion about this part, the parliaments, the legislative system, the judges. Should they have a different kind of awareness, just different than laws? And I understand you mentioned a lot, no more technical, or let's say no in-depth technical when it's not needed, but they might be in charge of taking decisions or voting for rules about technical stuff.
So as you're referencing things I said, I guess in the first instance, this is directed at myself, and then I'd like to hear Dario's opinion on this. Look, my own opinion is that we have too much regulation, to be quite honest. When you look at what you can do to help the general public and industry, there's a range of instruments, and the most brutal and the most slow moving is legislation. It takes ages to make it, and it takes ages to change it. But, in some cases, it's the right thing to do. Then you've got soft law and soft policy. This is a much better instrument. It's much more malleable. It moves quicker, etc. You've got standards. You've got codes of conduct. You've got awareness raising. Blah 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 blah. So all these instruments are at our disposal. I think we have a lot of good legislation, but I think it's gone a bit too far. I certainly do not think we need any more unless it's extremely targeted and for something very specific. And certainly not in awareness raising. I don't even know what you would legislate there. I think soft policy making is a much better instrument, and mobilizing the stakeholder community, which is definitely not legislative. It's much more, how you interact with your stakeholders, how you actually do practical things. So no, legislation to my mind is not the answer. But Daria, I don't know, maybe you disagree with me.
I think there is a need of a fitness check for sure for all the legislation overall, the European level and national level. But I would do much more cooperation with education institutions overall for Europe, because here is still a bit more like each state its own responsibilities in a way. But I think there is much more space to do more there, and the share resources and enable cyber citizen in Europe in a way, or internationally, why not? So yeah.
But which instrument would you use, Daria? How would you do this?
Well, I think still we'll go back to public-private partnership in a way. So institutions a bit, organizations from private a bit, or universities a bit. So yeah.
So I agree with Daria.
Thank you. And then I would ask you for final, let's say, takeaways from Steve and Daria before we close.
Well, if I may, I would like to ask Steve, looking back at all the years in cyber, is what was one thing that you put a green flag on, and what's one thing that is work in progress overall? And and for myself, I would summarize my point that I try to make in the beginning, that I always think that a human firewall is complementary to the technical firewall. And I would really encourage everybody that, of course, you read your dashboard, but please also think about how you can relate it to the human firewall that needs all the data in order to tailor the training and to communicate about your indicators of vulnerabilities. So yeah, that's my point, the complementarity of both.
So I guess my point would be, and this has been a continual emphasis throughout my career, is that I've always thought that people are always looking for a way not to think in cybersecurity. They're looking for methodologies or tools or anything which will enable them to get a hand on the problem without thinking too much about it. And I don't think this is done, in a conscious way. It's just the way the industry sort of works. My point of view is that cybersecurity is and will always be a subject where you need to think deeply, because anything which is automated in any way is automatically a target for attack for someone who's prepared to think out the weak points. So you've got to be continually one step ahead of the attackers. So really, I have learned that don't be afraid to think things out. Don't be afraid to challenge things. Don't do things because other people are doing them. So don't copy what other people are doing. Think it out for yourself, understand your own risks, etc. And often the silliest questions that you can ask are actually the most brilliant ones. It's just that people are afraid to answer them. I know this is classic law, but it is so. And this is really, I think, I started with understanding problems, etc. And here's where I'll finish. I think people who do this, and who follow this process through, talk to others, as Daria said, communication, very important, using the collective brain of other people. I think these people are going to be very successful. So do not use an algorithmic approach to security.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Daria, for tonight. Thanks, Daniela and Hivo for co-hosting this. Thank you all to our audience who were really very nice today. We had under 22 audience. Thank you so much. Have a great evening, and we'll be seeing you soon in the next Square Table.
Thank you for my evening.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.